Sawadika, Namaste, and welcome to Sanjha TV. I'm your host, Amin Dylan, and today on the show, exclusively for you, I have the MP for Thornhill, Melissa Lantsman here. Hi, Melissa. How are you?
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here.
Good.
Oh, there's so much to talk about because we're at your 1-year anniversary since you were elected, and I was just telling you, we're about to hit that 1-year mark when you're officially sworn in. So what a year I'm sure it's been, right?
It's been a wild year.
Yes.
An interesting time in Canada, an interesting time in politics, an interesting time in the Conservative Party, and for sure, an interesting time for a first-time MP who knew what they were getting into, but still interesting.
Yes. So I should make sure everybody understands. So you were before in communications, so you had experience working with the political party, working on campaigns. So no stranger, but now as actually a sitting MP, I'm sure the experience is a little bit different. So let's actually just recap the first year. I always say it's like a report card, you know? There are some things I'm sure you expected that you're like, yes, that's exactly what I thought. But I'm sure there were some things that you were like, wow, I just had no idea I would have to deal with this, or, you know, it's politics.
Absolutely. And there was lots of things that are thrown at you. So, I mean, my first year, I knew what I was getting into, and I still did it anyway. And I have loved almost every second of it. And I have loved the community part of it the most, and I have loved Ottawa, and I've loved the transition that we've had both in our own party and both in my career and in my responsibilities. When I was first elected, I was given a rather hefty portfolio of being the transport critic, and a year, not even a year later, I've become deputy leader of the party. So it's an exciting time to be in politics. It's an exciting time to be a Conservative, and it's an exciting time to be a Canadian in a changing landscape where I think that we've got lots of issues to talk about.
So let's go back to making that decision to run. Walk us through it. So was it something you always grew up wanting to do?
I grew up wanting to do it. I grew up with politics as a hobby. And my parents, they're immigrants. I grew up just about, if you threw a tennis ball as far as you could from this office, that's where I grew up. I grew up in Thornhill. My parents came here in the late 70s, and they really wanted me to be a doctor. That was it. Like, be a doctor and politics could be a hobby. And finally, I proved to them that politics is a job and not a hobby. But it took a really long time. But I've always wanted to do this. I've always had one foot in community affairs, one foot in politics. I've always supported the people that work here and Conservatives across the country. So this was a natural transition, and it so happens that the guy who was here for 13 years retired, and he left it in good shape, and he supported me, and I was able to slip right into the seat and take care of the community.
That's one thing I've noticed. Politics, there's a lot of things to do with timing. Right? You can work on things, you can run, and sometimes it's just not the party's time or your time. So why now in particular? Was it because of the retirement, or was there something about it?
Part of it is part of the retirement, but I think that's everything in life. When in my family, they say you plan and then God laughs. And sometimes, sometimes it's good timing, and in my case, it certainly was. We've had strong representation in this community from Peter before me for 13 years. And so it was an easy continuity. I didn't think Peter would retire so soon, but he had other plans. So my plans changed too.
And so you got the opportunity
to
represent Thornhill.
And I was, and I still am humbled always by the community in Thornhill that trusts me to go to Ottawa every single day and speak on their behalf. And we have a good support base, we have a good volunteer base, we have a great staff here that make sure that we do right by Peter's legacy, and that we take us forward in presenting the things that people in this community want, and I think Canadians in the GTA want.
When the folks of Thornhill elected you, I'm sure you had many conversations at the doors when you were making phone calls. What were they sending you to Ottawa for? What were the issues that they really wanted you to address?
You know what? The issues haven't changed. I got elected post-COVID, and I've had an opportunity that a lot of people in 2019 didn't even have. So we started to get together, and there was a lot of people that saw our restrictions as problematic here. There is a cost of living crisis in Thornhill. There's a housing shortage in Thornhill. There is transit and infrastructure needs. There is a rising tide of hate crimes and anti-Semitism, particularly in this community. And they sent me to Ottawa, and they said, and quote, don't be afraid to speak up for us. And I've taken that to heart, and that's what I've been doing.
Okay, so 1 year has gone by. There's always so many issues to talk about, right? And like I said, there's so many moving parts because you can plan to go, I'm going to focus on these issues, but then something happens and you have to pivot. So let's just kind of summarize it. What is the one thing you think in your first year you're really proud of, and what is the one thing that you're really wanting to work on?
So I've done right by the community in the sense that we've spoken and we've put Thornhill at the center. I know where I get elected, I know who I speak for, and I make sure to do that in Ottawa, and I'm proud to have done that. What I didn't see coming, or what we didn't see as the primary issue, is this 40-year high of inflation. And a fairly middle-class community having trouble, working harder, not getting ahead. And that's primarily where our focus has shifted. So sometimes at the cost of other issues in this country, but by and large, people who come into this office, people who stop me in the grocery store, who stop me at the gas station, who stop me at the local fried chicken place, which I really like, they tell me that it is harder and harder to get by, for their kids to own a home, for them to get to work or to drive their kids to dance or hockey, because the cost of everything is soaring, and that's our focus.
So we've been hearing from many of our viewers, these are the issues, right? So interest rates, highest they've been in so long. Inflation,
highest in the G7 too. Like, we have the highest.
Yeah, inflation has gone up.
For sure.
We have groceries have gone up, gas has gone up, housing has gone up across Canada.
For sure.
It used to be historically in the major cities, now it's everywhere. So people are wondering, how did we get here?
Well, how did we get here is we overspent, and we continue to overspend. And it was important during the pandemic to help people, but we've continued on to the spending. We're talking about tripling the carbon tax. And if you want to talk about how things get expensive, groceries, gas, home heating, the things that we need. These are not the things that we want. This is not like going skiing on the weekend or going out to dinner with your friends frivolously. This is about putting food on the table, getting your kids to school and to practice and to activities. This is about heating your own home, and we're talking about a tripling of the tax. This is the things that need to stop in this country. We need to start to look at our own finances, because much of this inflation is made right here in Canada.
So now we have a new leader, because, as we were going to say, there's been a change in the party. So as much as people are looking at the Conservative Party to say, we need you to help address these issues, we have a leadership change now.
For sure.
You are actually one of the early supporters of Pierre Poilievre. Can you kind of summarize for us, what did you see in him before everyone else noticed him or were able to throw support behind him that made you go, I'm going to come out and publicly support him?
You know what? Pierre has been a vocal proponent, particularly about this inflation issue. And he started talking about it a couple of years ago. And you always want somebody to lead your party who, like in hockey, you go where you go where the puck is going. He's the guy to direct us out of this crisis. I think he's ideologically aligned with me and with many Canadians in terms of we've got to look at the issues that are facing Canadians, Canadian families, small businesses, and people who want to come here. And I think that we've stopped thinking about people in our policy-making process. And he's the inflation buster. So yes, absolutely, I'll support him. And there's an excitement around him, around his leadership in our caucus, in our party, and I think more broadly, certainly across this neighborhood and all of the neighborhoods surrounding here, about somebody who is going to take our finances seriously, somebody who's going to stop the spending, cut taxes, and get people back into control of their lives.
Mm-hmm. So if our viewers are thinking, there's going to be an election eventually.
Eventually.
They're thinking, okay, not only do I have to figure out which party platform I support, but then leadership plays a big role as well. So people already know Justin Trudeau very well, right? Pierre Poilievre, I think a lot of people are getting to know him now in a leadership role.
Absolutely.
I feel like perhaps you have a better relationship than most Canadians would have with him, right? I feel like you work closely with him. You've known him for many years. So do you feel like people know who the real Pierre is?
I think people are going to get to know him. I think there are, we've never seen anything like this. He was attracting thousands of people at almost 100 rallies right across the country at a time where this wasn't a thing. So people are interested, people want to know him, and I think he's put a good team around him of a diverse caucus with diverse interests, with different levels of experience, women, men, all backgrounds, both professionally and nationality-wise. That I think we've got a good proposition for Canadians, and I'm excited for them to hear about it.
And so, one of the things also that I hear from folks, especially newcomers, they're always like, which party do I join? Who do I support? Let's find out your thoughts on this. So,
well, I think you should join ours.
Of course. But what I mean is, the Conservative Party, one of the criticisms I've heard is some folks feel like it is not inclusive, that it does not support diversity. They don't know if they are a person of color, if they come from a certain country, if they are a woman, if any sort of different background, if they are welcomed in the party.
Sure.
And now I look at someone like you, and I go, the new face of the Conservative Party, perhaps. And so do you feel like now the party is really making strides to make sure it is really celebrating that diversity and inclusion?
Well, I'm probably the epitome of diversity, and so is the rest of our leadership team, frankly. But I think this is a party where it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter when you got here. It doesn't matter who you love. It doesn't matter whether you pray on Friday, on Saturday, on Sunday, or not at all. You have a place in the Conservative Party. And I think that's the message that's being heard loud and clear, despite the critics who don't want that to be true.
And prime example, like I said, I think
Prime
it's
example.
amazing that it's been about a year and look already at how far you've come in the party. Like, to me, that's really impressive. What do you think sets you apart from perhaps other MPs that have been here for many, many years that have not been given the same opportunities as you?
I think there are people that play all kinds of roles, and we have a really, really strong caucus of those who play a really vital role in policy, of those who play a really vital role in communicating. And I think somebody like Pierre finds, the thing that people do well, and they put them in that job. And I think, this is one of the things that I do well. Jumping into the minutia of policy is maybe not the thing that I'm the most good at, and I think that he's entrusted me with this role because of my strengths, and he's entrusted a lot of people in caucus based on their strengths, and I think as a team we're going to go forward.
Exactly. Okay, so I got to ask you, what does your family think of, after 1 year of seeing you as an MP, what does your family think?
Well, you know what, as a family who used to describe what I did as she's not a doctor, but I think they're thrilled, and most of all, I'm thrilled to have their support, to have their love, to have the patience, and to have the understanding, knowing that maybe I won't be at every single birthday, and maybe I have some other things to catch up with, and they're behind me 100%. And if you don't have that in this job, you're not going to be successful. Mm-hmm. And my brother's been my biggest supporter. We have a really, really close relationship, and he's the opposite of me. So he's just wowed by all of this, and I'm wowed by what he does every single day.
Amazing. I would say, it takes a village behind everyone to help them get into a position like yours, because the work-life balance can be sometimes a struggle. So you do need a strong family base behind
Absolutely.
you. How's that been in terms of just adjusting to that?
Well, that's the hard part, and that's the hard part that I don't think enough people speak about. Mm-hmm. Your family is where you're comfortable, your soft landing, where you come to shut it all off, and you don't get that all the time in politics. You're away from your family for long periods of time, particularly that I'm in Thornhill and I'm not in Ottawa, but I've got to be in Ottawa quite a bit. So between family, between friends, between a staff who becomes your family, who knows where you are and what you're doing at all times, between a volunteer base and a support base that tells you, what, you're doing the right thing, keep going, you're doing this for us. When you have all of that support lined up, and if one of those pieces is not there, it's a problem. But when you have all of that support lined up, things are a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. You were mentioning earlier your family came here in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, I don't know if they've ever shared that story with you, but do you remember why they chose to make Canada their home?
For sure. First of all, this is the best country in the world. And I won the lottery by them choosing to come here. My parents ran away from communism, where my mom wouldn't have the career that she had here. And it was hard. And my dad drove a cab here when he first came. He was an engineer who was uncredentialed. And that's still the problem 50 years later, where we still have a lot of smart people who had professions in their old countries not working up to their scope, up to their potential, and adding to the Canadian economy in the best way that we could have them. And they worked hard for me to have everything come easy to me, right? I got into the best schools. I was in all of the programs. My mom spent a lot of time making sure that I had everything that I needed in order to succeed. And this is the only place where a woman can be interviewing another woman who's deputy leader, who's an interviewer on a huge channel with a huge audience. This is the only place where that can happen.
I agree with you. But I was telling you before we got started, I think it's interesting because we're both children of immigrants. We're both young women in our profession.
Sure.
So I think, I like to think of my mom, and, I think of my aunties, and I think of how life was different for women when they were growing up in India versus, for the fact that they chose to came to Canada and make sure that their children, but especially their daughters, had more opportunity.
Sure.
So now I'm thinking, we see so many issues around the world, and we see issues facing women, and I think, Canada is a big country. We have many people that still are coming in here. I'm just wondering your thoughts. Do you feel like when you're speaking to new immigrants, when people are reaching out to say, I want to get my family over here, is this still the dream of immigrants? Canada is like the #1 choice where people want to start their lives.
People still want to come here, and we know that because of the work that we do in this office. But that doesn't mean that we can't make Canada better. We can't make it a better experience for immigrants. It was always hard to come to a new place, and maybe you didn't know the language, like in my parents' case, and maybe you weren't credentialed for the job to match your education, and things were hard, and you couldn't afford to live, and sometimes you already had a kid, and things are still hard, and they're getting harder. And I think that there are lots of things that we know from the immigrant experience of the kids of immigrants. Why is it still all happening? And those are some of the things that we want to change. We need people in this country. We want people in this country, and we need it to build a Canada that we want. And yes, I think the answer is yes. People still do want to come here, and we can make it better for them when they do.
So that Canadian dream is still very much alive.
I think so. Yeah. The Canadian dream is me sitting here, you sitting there. Not only our strong, supportive mothers and our aunties and all the women in our lives, but what it's done to our fathers. My father never told me no on anything. You can't do that because you're a woman. You shouldn't do that because you're a woman. And something, I suspect that wasn't the case back in communist Russia. I suspect that wasn't the case where a lot of Canadians came from. But I have the same in my brother. If he doesn't have a daughter, but if he did, there is no limit on what their daughters can do here.
So during the last election, when I was speaking with Canadians, I'm sure this is going to be no surprise to you, immigration was the biggest topic. Many people were either trying to get family members, spouses over, and everything was obviously shut down due to the pandemic. And we're still hearing that people are having difficulties being reunited or being able to get a status here. So what do you think is the solution, and what do you think the Conservative Party can bring to Canadians?
First of all, we've got a huge backlog here. We've got about a 2.8 million person backlog on our immigration system. And I think we're the party that has consistently said we need more immigrants. We need more economic immigrants to make sure that our country can function, that our country can be productive, that our labor force could be full, and that people can come here, work to their full potential, raise a family, and do the next generation of me and you sitting here, right? That's what we want. And we've got to make it easier. We've got to make it streamlined. And we've got to make sure that the engineers who maybe drove cabs 50 years ago, that same problem is not happening now. We need the engineers to be engineers. We need the doctors to be doctors. We need the nurses to be nurses. We need the professionals to be professionals, because that's what we need in this country. So I think that's a huge priority in terms of making sure that people come here, work to the fullest of their scope, raise a family, and become Canadian and add to our multicultural society.
But our viewers a lot of them have families back home.
For sure.
Especially in India, Pakistan. And, they would love to have their families join them, but they just can't get their applications looked at. So is anything being done to fast track that?
Yeah, look, one thing is that if we call this a priority, you actually have to make it a priority in your government. You can't just stand up and say we're gonna bring more people here. You've got to put your money where your mouth is, and if that's hiring more people, if that's not having computers look at forms and reject people, we've seen a lot of cases like that. If it's making sure that family reunification happens, and that's how we get people here, like it needs to be attractive to come to Canada. You need to be able to know that your family can come after you, and we've got to be the ones that encourage that.
Okay, so there we go. Hopefully that addresses some of the immigration questions, because it's always the biggest question we get
For sure.
from our viewers, and especially during election time. Before I let you go, I just want to, again, take this opportunity because I think it's so amazing to see young women like you in politics, especially in these positions of power, because oftentimes people are looking to see, is their local MP able to do something for them, but they're also looking for inspiration. Absolutely. And I know here, so many new families come here, again, coming from countries where perhaps they don't get the same opportunities for their daughters, for their sisters, for their wives. So how do we get more women like you, perhaps from our immigrant populations, from the South Asian community perhaps, to get into politics and perhaps join the Conservative Party?
Well, first of all, I think for those of you watching, for those of you who have kids, who are young people who want to be involved in the process, Canadian politics it's easy to get involved. Like you literally, like you did today, walk into the office, figure out a way to volunteer, figure out a way to bring yourself closer to the political process. When I know that the person who has the seat next is going to be one of the volunteers that were here from the beginning on my campaign. Somebody who is young, who got passionate about it, who's by my side every day, who just they found their spark. So if you can find your spark, walk into one of those offices, walk into a Conservative's office, walk into a campaign office and say, how do I help? How do I get involved in this? And you can be part of the change.
There you have it. And if anyone wants to reach out and contact you, how can they?
For sure, I'm the easiest person to find, Melissa Lantsman, on all of these social channels. I'm sure you'll tag me. And my office is in Thornhill. Look it up on Google. MELISSALANTSMAN.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. And everyone, again, we've got our MP, Melissa Lantsman, here exclusively on Sanjha TV. Thank you so much for watching. I'm your host, Amin Dillon, signing off.